Okay, in this video we're going to be looking at the federal budget and what are some examples of taxes the government collect, examples of government spending, as well as why it's important that we tax certain goods and services like we looked at in your assignment. So in terms of the main forms of tax, so tax is the main way the government or the federal budget collects money. So the government collects around $350 to $400 billion in tax every year, and that comes from a range of different taxes. So the main form of tax is what we call individual income tax. So when citizens earn money from having a job, they pay a progressive income tax, as you saw from your assignment. The government collects around 45% of their revenue from this direct progressive income taxes. It's also company taxes, so when companies make profits, around 30% of their profits are taxed in company tax. So if a company makes a profit of $1 million, they have to pay $300,000 in tax. So that's the second biggest form of government revenue, and the government collects around 22% of their revenue in company taxes. Then we have indirect taxes. The difference between indirect taxes and these two, which are referred to as direct taxes, is that indirect taxes you pay when you buy things, whereas the first two you're paying on your income. So indirect taxes are taxes placed on various types of spending. So we pay tax when we pay the GST on goods and services. We pay excise taxes on cigarettes and alcohol to try and deter consumption of those products because they're bad for society. There's luxury car taxes. There's also tariffs on imports, which I'll talk about in a second. So in terms of the main forms of indirect taxes, besides GST, we've got excise taxes. So excise taxes are an indirect tax, which means that they're a tax that you pay when you spend money, and they're on the purchases of alcohol and cigarettes that are deemed to be harmful for society. There's also excise taxes on petrol as well. Tariffs are taxes we pay when we import products from overseas. So the rate of tariffs that people have to pay when they import from overseas has gone down significantly, meaning we don't pay as much of a tax when we buy products from overseas anymore. The purposes of taxation revenue. There's a whole range of different purposes. So the first one is that the government needs to tax people and companies so they collect enough money to provide essential services. So they use the money that they get from different forms of tax to spend on education, public parks, welfare for the needy, infrastructure and defence. It also prevents the government from running large budget deficits. So what I mean by that is when government expenditure exceeds their revenue, they run a deficit, and that can lead to problems because the government will run up a lot of debt. So if in a given year they spend more than they earn, the government's debt will increase, and that can be problematic because then other countries might stop lending to us, and we may be forced to pay higher interest rates on funds that we borrow from overseas. And the government, if we run into too much debt, the government may need to start to pay all that debt back, and to do that they may need to raise taxes or cut welfare spending or cut money on education or health. So it can be really a bad thing if we it's important that we're collecting tax today so that in the future the government don't have to raise tax to pay off our debt. They also use taxes to prevent the overconsumption of demerit goods. So demerit goods are things like alcohol and cigarettes that are bad for society. And the government puts taxes on these products so the price goes up and there's less incidences of smoking and drinking within the society, and that's good because it helps improve our non-material living standards because we're healthier and there's less passive smoking and violence caused by drinking. We also place tariffs on foreign products to increase the price of foreign products. So in the past particularly they put taxes on foreign products to make Australian products relatively cheaper. And that helped to create employment in industries in Australia because we were able to compete with these foreign products, particularly in the manufacturing and textiles industries, so cars, clothing. And the last one is they also use taxes to make income more equitable or fair. So our tax system is progressive, meaning that high income earners pay a higher percentage of their income in tax, and it helps to reduce the gap between high and low income earners. Because rich people are paying more tax or high income earners are paying more tax. So within our purposes, we've got to collect money to provide services, to prevent budget deficits and growing debt, to reduce the consumption of demerit goods, to tax foreign products so the price of imports increases, and to ensure a more equitable distribution of income. In relation to expenditure in the federal budget, the main government expenditure is social security and welfare. So Most of this money actually goes towards age pensions, but it also goes towards unemployment benefits, providing family benefits for low-income earners as well. It's paid to the unemployed. It also gets paid to those that are retired, veterans from the war, the disabled, and so on and so forth. Health is the second part, so that can include any money going towards hospitals, on syringes, hospital staff's wages, purchasing a new ward, so growing the hospital, purchasing hospital equipment. Defence, it's about 7%. That can be any on new equipment, border protection, wages of Defence Force people. Education, most of the education budget is actually provided by state governments. So primary and secondary education is actually the responsibility of the states, but the federal government commits money to tertiary education, so university studies, and they also help provide funds for state and private schools. So the federal government does provide some money towards education as well. Public services, so all the salaries of those running on government, so all our politicians, money towards transport, so building new roads, railway services, etc., etc. And the last one is that the government's got quite a lot of debt, so some of the money that they earn goes towards paying off interest on their debt. Future problems for Australia. One of the main problems facing the Australian economy is that our population is getting a lot older, as a lot of people in Australia are born in the sort of the 50s and 60s during the baby boom. And as our population continues to age, the government continues to pay out more in expenditure, so on aged care pensions and health, but they're also collecting less revenue because less people are working. It could hurt our participation rates, and they mean that less people are part of the labour force. This could have negative impacts on our budget in the future. When you're defining the words budget deficit and budget surplus, just remember that a budget surplus occurs when government income, so receipts mainly from tax, exceed government expenditure. So that can include money spent on education and health and welfare and transportation. A budget deficit occurs when government expenditure exceeds government receipts. The government spending more on all those expenditures, health, education, welfare, transport, interest, than they are collecting in the various forms of tax. At the moment in Australia we have a budget deficit of around about $29 billion for this year, which means that the federal government over the last year, or in the year coming up actually, anticipates that they're going to spend $29 billion more than they're going to earn. Thank you.